Hey, this is the Necro Butcher from the movie The Wrestler, and you're watching the Wrestling Roundtable.
Welcome back to the Wrestling Roundtable. Joining the panel once again is our usual, our core, Rodney LeConte, videographer and a fan of 20 years. And we've got Chris Harris, vault manager and fan of about 16 years. Like Japanese wrestling, people want us to talk about ECW. This is not about ECW specifically, and I wanted to make that point firstly because hardcore goes well beyond and before ECW. We had Freddie Blassie in California in WWA and Japan in black and white days, becoming known as the Vampire because he was so bloody a wrestler. You had the Moondogs in the early 90s in Memphis and Jerry Jarrett before that. You had Abdullah the Butcher and Carlos Colon in the Caribbean well before ECW. And we have the Sheik and Bobo Brazil in Detroit when their famous series of matches. And of course, we've got the ECW influence that was FMW in Japan, which all connects together anyway. But when you talk about hardcore wrestling, the name ECW is obviously going to be mentioned up as the most famous promotion that did that sort of thing. And when you think of that, especially the first few years, you think of Terry Funk. And I think the best hardcore wrestler talk has to start with Terry Funk. Not just because of his longevity and his influence, but he's also second generation. His father, Dory Funk Sr., was the king of the deathmatch in Texas, so he's carrying on this hardcore tradition across the globe, across the decades, and I think that deserves some recognition, first of all.
Well, Dory was the straight-ahead, legit athlete, and Terry was the crazy, wild one. So you have that basic dichotomy, that paradox.
The good son and the bad son.
The good son and the bad son. You always also start with the wrestling fans who like wrestling for wrestling and wrestling fans who like hardcore. So that was a part of the gimmick, that part of his character that was always there was he was out of his mind. He had a lot of legendary matches, but he had one of the great empty arena matches with Jerry Lawler, and it was just violent.
And the feud with Flair.
And the feud with Flair, of course, very violent as well. So he really embodied what a hardcore wrestler should be. Somebody who has credibility as a wrestler, but is just out of their mind and they don't want to play by the rules.
Right. He's one of the few wrestlers that can actually seem crazy psycho, and he used that name and reputation when ECW was starting up to give the rub to the guys like Dreamer and Raven and whoever. And you can't get a lot of 50-year-old guys except for maybe that, what the fuck is that Joe who got beat up by Gypsy Joe. You don't get a lot of 50-year-old or plus guys like that Gypsy Joe idiot who got beat up by New Jack. You're not going to get.
He was legitimately tough, though, right?
You're not going to get a lot of guys their age to go into a barbed wire match with Sabu and have the most brutal barbed wire match I think we've ever seen. But who do you think are some of the best hardcore wrestlers?
Necro Butcher. He stands out. He looks unique amongst the Ring of Honor, at least. And he looks like the kind of guy that would be in a bar drinking quietly, and then a fight breaks out, and he destroys everybody.
What was great about his character initially, though, was he seemed like that sort of Michael Myers, Leatherface sort of psycho guy who didn't speak and was just about butchering people. Yep. And he also took such punishment. And I mean also in the CZW backyard sort of stupid
you see
shit.
Him, and he's always barefoot. You see him walk through glass and tacks. How does a man do that?
And his back is carved up from weed whackers and shit. I mean, that's not my style of thing. I don't like that at all. But Necro would do a lot of other hardcore style stuff that wasn't nearly as extreme or as disgusting.
He doesn't also need to fall back on the hardcore a lot of times. You can see he can have a decent match with somebody without using weapons.
Cactus Jack. I don't think he could go on the show without him. Bang Bang, Mick Foley, going from Japan, all these different territories. The matches he had in WCW in the early 90s, and then he had a stint in ECW, and then WWF, he came in at the Attitude Era. He helped bring that hardcore style to the general audience with that Hell in a Cell match.
His time in Japan really solidified his reputation as king of the deathmatch.
Yeah.
Because you don't see beds of fucking nails in America and sickles and glass and shit.
No,
and when they would show clips of that, it sort of badly influenced a lot of backyard indie wrestlers who started...
Who admired to be bloody freak show.
Of course, the problem is, to paraphrase Beethoven, is that they knew the notes but not the music. That's another thing, and we might get to that. But we are going to talk about some of our favorite hardcore matches. So what were some of yours, Chris?
Triple H versus Cactus Jack, Royal Rumble 2000. Boy, did that make Triple H into who he is, that match.
That's what the whole feud was designed to do.
Yeah, it was designed to do, and boy, it really solidified him as a top contender, which unfortunately we're still seeing the effects of today.
But it is also a great visual, taking a pedigree with thumbtacks sticking out of your head.
He Who We Do Not Speak Of versus Kevin Sullivan at Great American Bash 96. It may not have been as bloody and there were no thumbtacks, but at the time it was really good with them fighting through the crowd, fighting through the bathrooms, the suplex off the table. For that time, it was a match of the era.
The Nasty Boys versus Cactus and Max Payne. That's
Alex's father, right?
It. That was violent, and even the things that fell apart, like the table that they were standing on, it just added to the mystique because it's supposed to be a train wreck. People just trying to hurt each other, destroying concession stands and fighting on that ridiculous ramp that WCW had that led up to the ring, and just taking back bumps to the concrete. Just disturbing and violent and fun.
Now, we did mention the Born to be Wired barbed wire match with Terry Funk. The other half of that was Sabu. And Sabu, rightfully so, does get a lot of shit for being Mr. Botchamania half the time. But when he's on, that's another guy. Doesn't need to convince you he's crazy. Just look at him. Scarred up with the second generation Sheik coming in. He had such amazing stuff. That's how he built his reputation on the indies. That's how you started hearing about Sabu, at least in the Northeast. He was doing a lot of innovative, crazy shit. And that barbed wire match, when he's taping up his bicep that just got sliced open, when he's breaking his jaw on the barricade and taping it up, you can't create a character like that.
That's guy right out of the asylum.
Mm-hmm. But when we're talking about ECW, one of my favorite series of matches was Masato Tanaka and Mike Awesome. Now, they did it like Heyman would do for a lot of things. So often, I can't tell them apart. They all look the same after a while. They took a break for several years and brought them back for One Night Stand. And I think that's one of the best hardcore matches. I can't even believe WWE produced that match because it just was such an ECW.
I think all they had to do is just roll the cameras and let these two guys go at it.
It's a credit to the chemistry those two had. Like you guys brought up on the Japanese show and the Shawn Michaels and Undertaker. You let guys go a couple years without getting near each other. And then, boom, you bring it back, and it's even better sometimes.
Another match that gets a lot of shit for being two spots was the Hell in a Cell with Mankind and Undertaker at King of the Ring 98. Now, I remember watching that match with you live as it happened in 98. Ooh. I think it's unfair to Foley's performance to say that it's only two spots because the match didn't have technical wrestling and the sort of transitions and everything.
Sorry, that guy's throwing themselves off.
But it's a story.
20-foot cage doesn't have
psychology. Those are the two biggest spots ever in the history of wrestling as far as that kind of thing. And they've been trying to duplicate it ever since with Shane McMahon and Steve Blackman and Test falling off of sets into crash pads. There was no crash pad. When I first saw Hell in a Cell, I was like, what if somebody took a bump off of that thing? It would be scary. The guy would die. And when I heard that he went first off the cage through a table and then went through the thing, I thought he either had broken his neck back or was going to die.
On top of it.
That was unbelievable.
Planned or not, the fact is this guy sacrificed his body for our entertainment. It's the best match Jim Ross has ever called because he made it seem so much more important. But people forget the match continued after those two spots. To say nothing of the comeback, whatever he could muster. That was an incredible performance as it was after he broke his ribs and lost his tooth and was unconscious, blah, 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 to be able to climb up the cage with a separated shoulder and take another bump. The stuff he was doing for the fans, for our entertainment.
And the fans chanted, Undertaker.
I was practically in tears seeing what this guy was doing to try and create a good story.
Yeah, everyone's our money's worth. It's unbelievable.
We sat there just silently watching.
My jaw was on the floor. I couldn't believe this guy was doing that sort of stuff. People forget there's thumbtacks at the end of it and all the other stuff he was doing.
During the main event, too.
Well, hopefully you won't forget to stick with this segment because coming up next, we're going to talk about the worst hardcore wrestlers. The Michaels Undertaker Hell in a Cell and that are completely different stories, but they're both awesome for different reasons. I just hate when the Hell in a Cell, the one Mankind did the first time, is discounted. There's two spots.
Well, you know what I think of it. It's not a great match, but it's such an emotional match. Like, it's not a great. Exactly.
They can be one and the same.
Like the Iron Man match and Hogan Rock are completely two different things. They're still great matches.
Well, people dispute that shit too.
The Last Rites match, is that the one you're talking about with the coffin and Sting?
Last Rites.
Yeah.
The main event to Hardcore Homecoming, that was one of mine.
How about
Shane Douglas, Sabu,
that three-way?
triple threat
in the
match.
barbed wire?
How about
God, they were so broken down at that point.
This is the new effing show, Jerry Lynn, and you're watching the Wrestling Roundtable.
Giddy up.
Welcome back to the Wrestling Roundtable. Joining the panel once again is Brett Simonello, fan of over 20 years, and a fan of the original ECW as well. Now, we were talking about some of the best hardcore wrestlers and hardcore matches. There's the opposite side of the coin, so of course we have to ask, what were some of the worst hardcore wrestlers?
Edge. I don't think this guy is great technically or as a hardcore wrestler. He had a great match in '99, and then after that, he needed 5 other guys to have entertaining matches. They tried again. The last great good match he had was the One Night Stand in '06 that needed Terry Funk, Dreamer.
Buell Alita.
In other words, he needs a lot of bells and whistles.
I think he needs a lot of people. He doesn't have great one-on-one matches as a hardcore wrestler. He doesn't cut it for me.
Nobody gets me madder as a hardcore wrestler, human being, or anything than Vic Grimes. When he and New Jack fell off of that scaffold, I was kind of hoping he was dead because he's basically just a waste of anything, nothing.
Now, what I said earlier about all these people seeing Foley in '97 in that interview jump off the roof and then thinking, oh, I could be a hardcore wrestler too, but not knowing the notes, what they seem to forget is that there's a lot more to Mick Foley, the wrestler, the performer, than just doing a bunch of hardcore nesty plunges and barbed wire shit. But these guys just come out and think they can jump off 50-foot scaffolds like in that idiot XPW promotion and be big stars. Never works, does it?
No.
Steve Blackman,
Yes.
useless overall. Anything associated with the WWF hardcore title of that entire time is just criminal, and he was just a representative of have a kendo stick and a stop sign.
Can I mention another Steve? How about Steve Carino? What a monumental waste that is.
Going to the indies, you see these promotions like CZW, XPW, who want to be like ECW, but once again, don't know the music. There was a lot more to ECW than just doing shit for the sake of doing shit.
Great stories.
Right. But XPW was god-awful. CZW, you see these fucking backyarders cutting themselves open with light tubes with the U-Haul truck and the trees in the background. It's fucking embarrassing for wrestling, isn't it? Don't you think this ultra-violent stuff should be put out to pasture? Is it bad for wrestling?
It's bad for society. It just we don't need that. If we want to see real violence, there's enough of that on the internet. It's part of this culture with
Counterculture,
certain
so,
horror movies now. This ultra gore stuff that's out there, and it doesn't have the notes. Like The Shining has the music
Well,
and the
there's
notes.
a shock value. Who can do
the most the most disgusting, deplorable thing.
And all these promotions, I think they're trying to take what ECW built and trying to go to the next level. Everyone's trying to up whatever Mick Foley did in that Hell in a Cell match. And it's really not good for the sport of wrestling because you have guys who are really technically talented, but when people start to think of wrestling and all they see is these hardcore matches, it really takes away from the hard work that these guys are putting in.
It's almost like these t-shirt wearing fruitcakes from the backyard. It's like a cop-out for them. They can just do some frying pan spots in lieu of actually knowing how to
it
wrestle.
takes no talent to hit someone with a frying pan or a vacuum cleaner or a keyboard, whatever.
I don't need any skill, just stab me.
It also takes away from how do you have a Funk Lawler brawl, bloody brawl to beat each other up because they hate each other? How does that have any value if guys in these small indie things are beating each other with light bulb tubes over nothing, with nothing on the line?
It's disgusting
and
when they're
jumping
stabbing
off
with
rooftops
knives.
for no reason.
Think
There's
about
no
that
reason.
Foley
There's a
Triple
reason.
H issue that led to that Rumble match, that led to their Hell in a Cell match, and just
The emotion
the
behind the
emotion
match.
behind the retirement and just what it meant to have this pedigree guy come in and get a spot, and this other guy who's always had to earn it. They had a great story in all those matches, and the matches meant something. Whereas a normal wrestling match between the two on a SmackDown wouldn't mean as much. So if you do it in the right context, it's always going to work.
So do you think that a hardcore promotion can ever succeed? Or is it too niche? Is it too small? Is it too overdone?
No, it really would just end up being one big bloody mess.
Well, especially when they're run by these jackoffs like Ian Rotten and Zandig. Fuck you! But I think if there's a wrestling hell and I have to watch one comp nonstop on a loop, my wrestling hell would be Abdullah the Butcher. Oh my God, this guy can't even move. Unbelievably boring and bad, and I know he's got his head carved up and everything, but I never got Abby. It was never my thing. Moving on to some of the worst hardcore matches. What do you think are some of the worst hardcore matches?
Well, my boy that I was just talking about, Edge and Undertaker from Hell in a Cell last year's SummerSlam, they put in the tables. They could add in whatever element they want. The match just did not flow. Just a bad match overall. Everything involved.
China and Jeff Jarrett.
In the house cleaning match?
That was probably one of the worst debacles. I mean, I guess that's, no rules,
Oh,
whatever. But that
boy.
was a debacle. Never want to see that again in my life.
Funk and Sabu barbed wire deal. Just seeing two guys like tangled up in barbed wire, it's like, okay, we understand it. You guys are willing to take that risk, but there's no action. We're in barbed wire. Oh, they're getting cut up, and they're getting cut up more, and now his pants are cut up, and now his arms are cut up. Okay, great. Both guys are decent enough. They don't need it, and it made everybody want to have a barbed wire match. And the WF was talking about, we got to do something like that too, until they ended up with like Bradshaw and Big Show in a cage with a little barbed wire on top.
I think there was some considerable drama to that match. Unlike the Super Bowl halftime show in '99, you want to talk about Lawler and Funk having a great empty arena match? Oh, Mankind and Rock could not live up to that shit.
That's probably the worst ending in wrestling ever.
It was just a joke, the entire thing, and you're getting exposure from Super Bowl fans, supposedly. You want to show them something presentable, not this fucking fake-looking horrible
From
joke.
But at that time, with the people watching, everyone bought into it. Well, not everyone, but the majority of their fans back then.
We can't let Sabu versus Sandman from November to Remember '97 go unmentioned.
Leave the Sandman alone.
Well, he's another one of these guys that you've seen for so long. You've seen maybe 3 wrestling moves out of him. Not to say he can't wrestle, but when you're supposed to be doing this hardcore stuff that you're known for, the fact that the table breaks before he even puts someone on it, the ladder falls, they fuck up every spot. Those two together, it was like the anti-Owen and Brett in terms of hardcore.
Dustin Rhodes and some guy, and they're on a truck, and it's going like
Some
80
guy.
miles an hour down.
Early 90s.
He doesn't even recognize
Mark
Smash from Demolition when he sees
It
it.
was
Oh, he does
Smash?
so, rather.
That was pretty awful to me.
The Boss Man, Al Snow, double cage, dog
Kennel
match.
and Al.
Dog
Yeah,
match, yeah.
Pick up your own
Jesus,
dog
please.
shit.
Eliminators versus Sabu RVD matches where it's entertaining for all the wrong reasons. Like they're setting up a chair, nobody knows what they're gonna do with the chair. Then Sabu jumps on it, doesn't hit something, and then
Slips
something-
off it.
It's great. It's funny for all the wrong reasons.
That's one of those matches that when you see it on paper, like, ooh, that's going to be cool, and it ends up being the complete opposite.
Botchamania. It's like a Botchamania.
Right. But I'll tell you, the worst world title match I've ever seen in person was the last ECW, the real fake / Bingo Hall ECW promotion in the Hammerstein, Guilty as Charged 2001. The main event was a ladder match for the title between a drunk Sandman, and you know how good normal Sandman must be, if there is such a thing,
I think Drunker is better.
against Steve Corino and Just Incredible. Oh my God, was this match bad. There was no selling, nothing worked. It was just the complete antithesis of pro wrestling. ECW. But we're done talking about hardcore wrestling.
We're done.
We're going to move on
done.
because next month we're going to be talking about a lot of stuff you want to stay tuned for. More updates on WrestlingRoundtable.com on the future of the show. We're also going to be talking about the best and worst gimmick matches. So for the panel, Alex Payne and Shane Hagedorn from Ring of Honor, Chris Harris, Brett Simonello, Rodney LeConte, Lawrence Haber. I'm your host, Eric Santamaria. Thank you and join us next month.